Superman the movie is generally acknowledged to be the granddaddy of the modern superhero film. Not the first superhero movie ever, but the first to combine a serious approach to the material with modern special effects technology to create a completely engrossing experience. The film combines a mythic sweep with a modern down-to-earth portrayal of the characters and the world, and features a star-making turn by Christopher Reeve and a fantastic score by John Williams. It was a blockbuster success in 1978, and many people still consider it one of the great superhero films of all time. But something you may not have noticed is the weird way the movie references time. And no, I'm not talking about this. That's time travel, and everyone acknowledges that problem. No, I'm talking about the entire rest of the movie, because in the process of trying to accomplish two admirable but mutually exclusive goals, the movie ends up retconning itself. I'm Tony Frazier, author, blogger, near genius, and this is Hero Go Home Presents Superman the Movie. Does anybody really know what time it is? So, we all know the basic structure of Superman the movie. It starts out on Krypton, where young Kal-El is sent to Earth before the planet blows up. His ship crash lands in rural Kansas, where he is adopted by the kindly Kents. His adoptive father dies when he's in high school, after which Clark is led by a Kryptonian crystal to the North Pole, where the crystal constructs him a fortress. Years later, a grown Clark moves to Metropolis, where he becomes a reporter for the Daily Planet, falls for star reporter Lois Lane, and battles evil mastermind Lex Luthor, who has a master plan which involves nuking California. Right? Wrong. It doesn't start on Krypton. It starts in a movie theater, where we see the date June 1938 projected on the screen, which happens to be the date of publication of Action Comics #1, where Superman was first introduced. The Action Comics #1 we are shown on screen is not the real one, however. It is apparently the issue published in the alternate universe that the movie takes place in, because Superman is not in it. Instead, the lead story is about the heroic reporters of the Daily Planet. We push past the Daily Planet building and into space, where we begin our journey through the opening credits, ending up at Krypton, where we begin the story. But why do we have that opening sequence? Well, number one, it's obviously an homage to the comic, but it also seems to explicitly tie the first publication date of Superman in our world to the birth of Superman in the movie's world. Let's see if that idea holds up. Jor-El puts an infant Kal-El into the spaceship, but by the time he reaches Earth, Kal-El has obviously aged a couple of years. When the spaceship crash lands, he can stand and walk. So, if the journey took 2 to 3 years, we're now in the years 1940 or 41. Is there any evidence in the film that this is the case? Yes, there is. The pickup truck Jonathan Kent is driving is a Chevy model which was produced between 1939 and 1941. Let's skip ahead to Clark's teen years. If the 1938 theory is true, then in these scenes where Clark is 17 to 18 years old, the year would be 1955 or 1956. Now, a guy by the name of Moviebob has produced an excellent overview of Superman the movie for his Really That Good series. I've got the link below, which has a lot of really cool and accurate insights. But one point I disagree with him on is that the Smallville scenes were meant to be timeless and could as easily take place in the 1930s as at any other time in the 20th century. He seems to base that opinion mostly on the people in this train scene, but we'll come back to that. No, this is very obviously meant to be the mid-50s. There are too many details specific to that time period. Here are a few. Plastic football helmets, not in common use until the mid-50s. In the 30s, they were leather. Poodle skirts with bobby socks and saddle shoes. These all existed prior to the 50s, but wearing them all in combination like this was not common until the 50s. And notice, all the girls are wearing them. Clark wears sneakers. Sneakers had been around from the turn of the century, but they were pretty much reserved for sportswear until the mid-50s saw teens wearing them as a daily shoe. The cars are all 1940s and 50s vintage. Clark's classmates are riding around in a Chrysler Town and Country convertible that was produced from 1946 to 1949, but you would expect a rural teenager to have a car that was a few years old. But the biggest clue that we're in the 1950s, and one that would register exactly that way for audiences of the time, is this. Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock came out in 1954, and it was the signature song for audiences to identify with the 1950s, since it had been the theme song for the first 2 seasons of the extremely popular show Happy Days, which also took place in the 50s. So it looks like our timeline works. Kal-El is born in 1938, flies through space for 2 to 3 years until he crash lands in Kansas in 40 or 41, and then 15 years later, he's either 17 or 18 years old, making the year either 1955 or 1956. Let's jump ahead to when Clark enters his newly built Fortress of Solitude and sees this recording from his father.
You do not remember me. I am Jor-El. I'm your father. By now you will have reached your 18th year, as it is measured on Earth.
So now we can clean up our timeline and see that it works perfectly. And I'm going to cheat a little by making the trip take 3 years for reasons. But wait, let's listen to that again and go on to the next sentence.
18th year, as it is measured on Earth. By that reckoning, I will have been dead for many thousands of your years.
Someone seems to have spilled some actual science onto my comic book movie. Jor-El seems to be referring to relativistic time dilation, in which a person traveling at near light speed ages very slowly, while hundreds or thousands of years pass in real time. So now our timeline looks like this, and 1938 is apparently just a random callback to the first issue of the comic that just coincidentally happens to fit our timeline perfectly. In fact, I think the details of the Kansas scenes are too perfect for this to be unintentional. I think they meant for the 1938 timeline to fit, and the Jor-El line here was a last-minute rewrite inserted for realism or something. Jor-El now gives Clark another tour through space, our third in the movie, and toward the end mentions that he's been talking non-stop for 12 years, meaning Clark is now 30 years old. I can't find the article that mentioned it, but I remember reading somewhere during the 1970s that DC Comics' editorial directive was that Superman's age was permanently frozen at 29. But here, he's 30, and I'll give you 316 reasons why.
For this reason above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son.
No one ever accused this movie of being subtle. Clark, now in costume as Superman, flies out of the fortress and goes to New York. Metropolis. Welcome to the wonderful world of 1968, which is what you get when you add 12 years to 1956. Only wait a second, this isn't right. This is 1978. What happened here? There are 10 missing years. Which is why the movie now decides to retcon itself. Superman gives an interview to Lois Lane, which Lex Luthor reads carefully. Listen to the information he gleaned from the interview.
In the interview, he says that the planet Krypton exploded in 1948. Ridiculous little freak. Took 3 years in a rocket ship to get to Earth.
But you see, now that changes our entire timeline. Kal-El didn't launch from Krypton in 1938 or thousands of years earlier. He launched in 1948, landed in 1951, and the high school scenes now took place in 1966. While teenagers in other parts of the country were protesting the war in Vietnam and listening to Motown and the Beatles, 1966 Kansas was apparently exactly 10 years behind the times. This does manage to explain the one apparent anachronism in the Smallville scenes, though. This Studebaker Hawk. Although the Hawk was first produced in 1956, this particular model is apparently from 1959, according to people who know and, care. Of course, none of this information was actually in the interview as it was depicted in the movie. Not only did Superman not give the location of Krypton or the date of its destruction, he didn't even tell Lois his actual age. So unless they had a long, detailed conversation somewhere during the Can You Read My Mind musical number, all the stuff Lois put in the story was made up, only it wasn't, because Lex uses that information to figure out when a kryptonite meteor would have landed on Earth, and he tracks it to Addis Ababa, which is how he gets the weapon he uses to almost kill Superman. Now, why would they do this? Because they obviously wanted to bring Superman into the contemporary modern world, but they didn't want to say Superman was 40 years old, so they fudged. Of course, none of this is stuff you would notice on a casual watching, and despite this rather gaping plot hole, I still love this movie, and besides, even this isn't the worst abuse of time in the film. And no, I'm still not talking about this. I'm talking about this. Remember this train scene? The deleted scenes make it clear that this little girl is Lois Lane as a child. She can't be more than 9 or 10 years old here, which means that if you add the 12 years to get to the Metropolis scenes, Margot Kidder is supposed to be playing a 21 or 22-year-old. And not only is there no way she passes for 22, she was 30 when the movie came out, it doesn't pass the smell test that a 22-year-old would somehow be the Daily Planet's star reporter. But you know what? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you liked this video, please pass it on to your friends. A friend of mine tells me I need to go ahead and ask for subscribers as well, but you know what? I'm just not there yet. If I can sustain a month of weekly episodes, I might get there. And for more commentary on films and comic books, visit my site at herogohome.com. I'm Tony Frazier, and thanks for watching.
You make me whole again.